Hi, I'm Stephen Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance. Our headquarters are in Calgary, Alberta. We're a national based federal party with a true populist nationalist agenda. We're going to look at the facts today pertaining to federal revenues, federal expenditures pertaining to the provinces. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we want to present the facts tonight. We don't believe, based on these facts, that the whole notion of Western separation, Alberta separation, we don't think there's any just cause for it. Is there inequity? Is there unfairness? In some aspects, there is, but we believe they can be fixed. And we shouldn't let a minority of separatists dictate the future of the country. We should let the facts guide us and not forget our patriotism, which is lacking in some quarters. I'm going to go through the facts, a whole bunch of them. The most important part of this tonight is at the end, so please try and stick through this. I'm going to try and be as quick as possible going through it. The first thing I want to refer to is the Confederate dollars. The separatists like to quote this. I'm going to put this in context at the end, but this is from 1961 to 2017. It shows the total net contribution by province in terms of federal fiscal balance. And you see Ontario is the largest contributor, $722 billion in net contribution. And that's from 1961 to 2017. Then you see Alberta, just over $600 billion. And then you got British Columbia, just over $100 billion. And then the rest of the provinces are in the negative. That means they're receiving. And you see Quebec is receiving the most, just under $500 billion. Then you got Nova Scotia, $300 billion. New Brunswick, $200 billion. Newfoundland, Manitoba, just under $200 billion. Saskatchewan is at $100 billion in receipt. In PEI, it looks like $250 million there, but this has been taken out of context. And it's important to remember the equalization scheme, which was brought about by the Conservative Party in 1957. The basic concept for equalization was a good one. It means that provinces that are less well off in terms of resources, productivity can be elevated to a basic norm of standard of living. We don't have issue with that at NCA. We do have issue with the way it's allocated, the formulation. Now I'm going to get into that in the latter part. Another thing we're going to address is the problem with when it came out in 1957. It was a straight welfare hand down, something for nothing. So you could argue what the Conservative Party did back in 1957. This is like communism, what they were doing. And then it was injected into the charter in 1982. And good luck getting that out of the charter. It's not going to happen. But we're gonna address this at the end of the presentation tonight. But we encourage people to think of all of Canada. There's a lot of we would argue self-centered thinking. People who have, for whatever reason, have become detached. But we're going to deal with more facts as we go through it. This is on CPP. This is out of the Fraser Institute. And this is one area you could argue there is provincial unfairness. Quebec administers its own CPP CPP program through the Canada-Quebec Accord. It's been doing this for a while. According to this Fraser Institute report, Alberta's paying an unfair, you could argue unfair, it's actually a fair portion because it's a younger workforce, there's less retirees, so they're paying more into CPP, $27.9 billion over the last decade. If we compare it to Ontario, Ontario's paying $7.4 billion with about one quarter, slightly more than one quarter of Alberta's contribution, but a much larger population. Then if you go down through this, it says maybe Alberta would be better administering its own CPP. It could save their contribution now is at 9.9%. Fraser Institute's claiming it could go down to 5.85%, and the other provinces would have to pick up an additional $367. There was another report out today, and the Economist was saying if Alberta administered its own CPP, there wouldn't be any economic benefit. The Alberta government is going to do a provincial study on this and decide what's in the best interest of the province. So we'll see what comes from that study. No one is forcing them to be in CPP. They can leave it if they want and administer it themselves. We're under the impression that there won't be much economic gain, if at all, because they would have to administer it and there's going to be costs administering. But let's see what the study says. The bottom line is they can get out of CPP if they want. So no one forced them to go in it. Just remember that. Now I'm going to turn to this. This is a county in Alberta. I want to go through it. Actually, the Wheatland County put out this proposal. I'm going to go through it because I think it touches on a bunch of the key issues. It talks about Alberta contributes more to the national economy than any other province. I'm going to deal with this later. I think this is a bit exaggerated, and we're going to get into that in the next part. Then it goes on about the pension plan. Well, the pension plan's been dealt with. The Alberta government's dealing with that, and they can get out if they want. And now it's going on about taxation now. And this is about equalization. I'm going to deal with that in the latter sections. The province of Alberta is underrepresented. We totally agree with the county here, and we're going to deal with that in the end. And this is an area where we can improve. This is an area of gross inequity that needs to be addressed. They're going on about the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and saying, oh, we want a provincial police force. I don't think there's anything stopping them from doing that. But vilifying the RCMP by these separatists is not helpful. There's a lot of professional RCMP who put their lives on the line every day. Vilifying the RCMP is not constructive dialogue. So whether Alberta would be better with a provincial force, that's up to the Alberta government again. But please don't vilify the RCMP. We know up top there's been some corruption there, and those individuals are being held accountable. And we know the head of the RCMP is appointed by the federal government. But don't vilify the officers on the ground. Thank you. And then here, this is about immigration. Quebec administers its own immigration. However, it's claiming here that Alberta accepted 61% more immigrants per capita than Quebec. We have no way to confirm that. Alberta is allowed to choose 5,500 economic migrants and so forth. And as far as we know, Alberta works with the federal government in terms of economic migrants. The Alberta Premier Kenney is bringing in 10,000 third world migrants into rural Alberta every year. So maybe you should look at the Alberta government and what they're doing. That's 40,000 third world migrants into rural Alberta, which is struggling. There's a lot of people who don't have jobs, yet they're pouring in all these third world migrants. So we don't view this as a big issue. The federal government does collaborate with the provinces. And whether Alberta administers in its immigration policy, I think it's better that the Alberta government works with the federal government on immigration. I should qualify, NCA supports reduced immigration. We support a moratorium followed by 50,000 or less total immigration into Canada per year. So under NCA governance, immigration would not be an issue for Alberta. There won't be that many immigrants coming in. We're going to focus on developing, retraining Canadian workers and trying to get them back to work. And trying to get the unemployed working, trying to encourage homeless people to work part-time if they can, encourage that. We want to encourage our seniors. We got so many talented seniors across this country who have amazing skills, so we want to promote seniors if they're interested, if they're able to work part-time and even full-time. They should be tapped into. So this is what NCA, so we don't view this immigration grievance to have much substance. And then they have their resolutions here, and you know, what struck me is the arrogance of some of these people. They're so self-righteous and demanding. You know, they're like crybabies. And I don't understand it. There's just so much hostility and I don't know where it's coming from. But they're demanding province of Alberta withdrawals from the Canada Pension Plan. Well, the Alberta government is looking into it, and there's nothing that says they have to stay in it. But don't blame the federal government for being in the Canada Pension Plan. Alberta could have always walked away. So you can't blame Trudeau for that. I know the Conservative Party went on a marketing frenzy. We got to get rid of Trudeau. And NCA doesn't support Trudeau. But we're not naive enough to think that he's the pinnacle of everything that's wrong for Canada. He's just a puppet in our regard. There's a multi-controlled party system. They're all working together as far as we're concerned. You know, focusing all on Trudeau, it's ridiculous. Blaming Pierre Trudeau and all the debt ignores the egregious debt of Mulroney and Harper, which is over $444 billion since 1968. Come on. This is not reality. They want the province of Alberta to collect its own personal income tax. Okay. They collect their provincial tax. The federal government collects the federal portion. And that's probably a good thing. You know, the federal government needs money to run their government. They don't need to be held hostage by provinces. At the same time, we need to reduce taxation. It's extreme in Canada, across the country, not only in Alberta, across the entire country. It's extreme. There's a bloated federal bureaucracy. There's bloated provincial governments. There's major foreign outflow. NCA has policies to deal with all this. Section 88, the Supreme Court decision, Quebec secession, remove equalization from the Canadian Constitution. And they want a provincial referendum. And I don't know if the Kenny government's going to do that, but whether it's a referendum or not in Alberta on the equalization, it is part of the charter, and there's steps there to get it removed, and it's not going to get removed. The concept, as I mentioned in the beginning, is a good one because it's helping provinces that would be in abject poverty so they can have a decent standard of living. The problem with the equalization is the formula, which can be amended without taking it out of the charter. So getting rid of the equalization, I don't think most Albertans would support that because a lot of them are humble people, generous people, and they want to help fellow Canadians who are in need. They don't want to be exploited though. So we have to deal with the inequity and unfairness. Let's go down further here. They're talking about demand Senate reform, whatever. And they're, Alberta's acted decisively in holding Senate election. Yeah, there were some, but Harper never fulfilled on his pledge for Senate reform. And it's in the Constitution Act. So that's going to require a Constitution amendment. NCA, what we support on the Senate, is holding a national binding referendum on the Senate. Either we keep it the same, we have elected Senate, or we absolve the Senate. That's what we support. Are we demanding separation if we don't get it? Of course not. But look at our policies. Again, they're talking about the start preparing option to replace the RCMP. They want to vilify the RCMP and have some provincial force. Well, that's going to be up to the provincial government in collaboration with the federal government. As I mentioned, vilifying the RCMP on the ground, I don't think most Canadians would tolerate and accept. These officers put their lives on the line, and I met some incredible professional RCMP, and there's lots of them. And in any force, there's going to be some bad apples, but to paint them with a broad brush like that it's just not good. And then they enter an agreement with similar to to oversee its own immigration. I don't think that's a big issue because they already have a lot of say over the economic migrants coming into Alberta. What you should do is hold the Alberta government more accountable. Why are they bringing 10,000 third world migrants into rural Alberta every year? That's what you should be asking Albertans. Why are they doing that when rural Canada is suffering? That's what you should be asking. And then this is the arrogance I don't understand. That these demands in good faith, if they're not, we're going to separate. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And now I'm going to shift. A lot of people don't know that. Some of the grievance that we're hearing is connected to pipelines. Well, Harper had a 4-year majority, and he didn't get a single pipeline off the ground. And yet Alberta, all they do is vote Conservative Party, thinking the separatists think having a majority Conservative Party is their answer. It doesn't understand. Now this Wexit thing, they're talking about having a provincial and federal party. So they're going to have a federal party, which is going to, if in the, it may suck seats from the Conservative, which is only going to guarantee A majority for the Liberals. It doesn't make sense. These people are not thinking straight. It doesn't make sense. And Trans Mountain has started construction. As of August 21st, 2019, they've started to build the West Ridge Marine Terminal. They've started construction in other areas. 2,200 people have been hired on Trans Mountain. It is going through as we speak. Apparently, there's 3 First Nations that would like to buy it. I don't know where they're going to get the money from, but if they buy it and run it, and we don't see any harm in that. But this is going through Trans Mountain. Now I'm going to turn to what I think is the most important aspect. This is on the distribution of federal revenues and expenditure. This will give you a good understanding of what's going on in Confederation. This shows the federal revenues and expenditures from 2010 to 2017 in dollars per capita. And we see here, these are the total revenues in the yellow here. And these are the total expenditures. And they're basically the same at around $8,408 per capita per individual. If we go down further, this is the federal revenues and expenditures by province, 2017 in dollars per capita here. These are the revenues. Alberta, what's the figure here? It's in dollars, so it's over 11,000 per capita, 11,738. Alberta right there. They're paying the most in terms of revenue. And then you got Ontario at 8,816. Quebec is contributing 6,397 per capita. And you see the PEI is contributing the least, 6,150. You see that there? Then this is what the expenditures coming back. Alberta is receiving the least, 6,642. Quebec is receiving 8,355. The Maritimes are receiving the most. You can see it right there in terms of expenditure back. Manitoba is receiving over 10,000 back. The national average is 8,376. Revenues, 8,408. Expenditure. Saskatchewan is neutral. The revenues going out, the expenditures coming in. BC has slightly more going out than coming in. But this is all based on equalization. This isn't some nefarious conspiracy against one province against another. This is the equalization that the Conservatives in 1970 legislated. And that is now in the Charter. And in 2009, the Conservative Party, in a majority, took another look at the formula. And they didn't do much to it. If anything, Quebec is getting more. But I'm going to talk about that at the end. But it makes me wonder why Alberta is voting for the Conservative Party. Why? Why are they conditioned that this is all Trudeau and the Liberals? If we look at the debt since 1968, the Conservative Party has added more than double the federal debt than the Liberals. Though it's changing quick because they're expected another 93 billion over the next 4 years, but it's 458.9 billion by the Conservative Party since 1968. In just over 19 years, the Liberals are at 214.9 billion over 26. That'll go up to 300 billion over the next 4 years. But the Conservatives are well ahead. So they put out a myth that they're fiscally responsible. They're the least fiscally responsible of those two parties, without question. The facts show that. Yet the people in Alberta and Saskatchewan, all they do is vote Conservative. And they blame Trudeau and the Liberals for everything. It doesn't make sense. They're not looking at the big picture. If we go down further, this is the federal revenues by province. This is a really good graph because it shows what's happening here. The reason Alberta is paying more is the higher incomes. You see the direct personal income tax. Alberta, 6,636 per capita. And we look at Ontario, it's at 4,336. Saskatchewan is at 4,180. You see there. Quebec, 2,789. But the cost of living is basically the same in Quebec as Alberta. It's not like Quebecers are getting a free ride. And you see the lower incomes in PI, 2,783 by personal income tax. And there's a higher proportion direct corporate income tax, over 1,800 in Alberta. In Quebec, it's 1,100. Ontario, 1,400. Saskatchewan, around 1,400. So this is the reason Alberta's paying more. Its revenues are a lot higher. They're close to 12,000 total. Quebec is just over 6,000. You see it here. Then we look at federal expenditures by type. Net expenditure on goods and services. This is the government allocating the expenditures. It's on goods and services. In the province, it's around 2,000 per capita. This is on debt servicing cost. And this is on transfer to persons per capita, 2,400. And then there's a transfer to the governments. Right here, 2,900. This is how it's being distributed. Net federal expenditures on goods and services by the provinces. Alberta at just under 1,200 per capita. Saskatchewan at 1,352, so it's a bit low. This is all based on equalization again. That's the reason Alberta's lower, BC's lower. Quebec is at 1,700, but you see the Maritimes over 3,300 in New Brunswick. Nova Scotia over 5,300. PEI over 3,500. This is all equalization. Federal transfers to persons by province. $2,500 in Alberta, over 3,000 in Quebec, and it's higher in the Maritimes. Federal transfers to provinces. Alberta just over 2,000. This is per capita. Ontario is below Alberta at just under 1,900. Manitoba's over 4,000. Quebec is at 2,700, below Manitoba. The Maritimes, very high. BC and Alberta are about the same. Ontario's lower than BC and Alberta. You see that there. So that should give you a better idea of the federal distribution. It's all according to the equalization payouts. And we've looked at this issue. If we look at oil production, we looked at the data. We're going to do something on this, but it's been fairly consistent output in Alberta. What's happening is there's about 52,000 barrels a day coming into Eastern Canada. Basically Saudi oil that's being refined in the East Coast. It's coming in unrefined, being refined in the East Coast. Most of the barrels coming out of Alberta, it's around 42,000 barrels a day. Most of it's unrefined. The problem is a lot of it's being sent down to the US and then coming back up refined, and it costing a lot more. The problem in Alberta is we believe it's been mismanaged. There should have been major refineries in Alberta. That would have created an incredible amount of high-paying jobs, and the product could have been sent out refined. But in Alberta, there was a conservative provincial government in there for over 40 years. There was a lot of corruption. They were stealing from the Heritage Fund. There was a lot of cronyism and mismanagement. That partly explains what this is how the NDP got in for a year, and now the Conservatives and just a glossed over new name are back in there, but it's been mismanaged. The international oil companies, there's 5 of them that are controlling it. Alberta would have been better off investing in major refineries. It's not too late to do that. But they have to fight the international oil companies to do that. It'll be a real struggle. And these mainstream parties are not interested in that. But if we look at this overall, we believe there's 2 areas of inequity, unfairness, provincial, that need to be addressed. The first one is the allocation of the federal seats. We don't believe they are fair, and we believe if they are resolved, this will go a long way with dealing with an equity. Right now, Alberta has 34 federal seats. It has approximately 4.371 million people. It has a GDP as of 2018 of $338 billion. If we compare this to Quebec has 78 seats, has a GDP of $365 billion, and a population of 8.485 million. It's basically double the population. We believe just based on population alone, Alberta should at least have 10 more seats. If we compare it to the Maritimes, they have 32 seats, just 2 short of Alberta, yet they only have 1.8 million people, and they have a GDP of 106 million. So there's some really blatant unfairness right there. Why do the Maritimes have almost the same representation as Alberta in the House of Commons? If we look at Ontario, to put this in better perspective, They have above 825 million GDP. That's more than Alberta and Quebec combined, the GDP of Ontario. They have 14.57 million people, and that's more than combined Alberta and Quebec populations. They have 121 seats. So the issue we're saying here, looking at this, we don't believe Alberta is being fairly represented in the legislature. So our proposal, we think, and we've said this before, we think the federal seats should be based on GDP. We would do it over the last 4 years, the average GDP, and determine the number of seats based on that. That way, those who are producing the most, those who have most to lose, have more say at the federal level of government. Under our seat allocation, Alberta would have almost the same number of seats as Quebec, and that would go a long way to dealing with the inequity and unfairness. And obviously the Maritimes would have less seats. They have a fraction of the GDP of Ontario, Quebec, Alberta. But some of these separatists argue that Alberta's bankrolling the country. That's insane. Ontario has literally more than double the GDP of Alberta, and the GDP of Quebec is higher as well. And I just showed you the federal revenues there. So that's a ridiculous argument there. The second issue of inequity, in our opinion, is the equalization formula. We think the idea of equalization, as we mentioned, is a good idea because it's helping provinces to have a decent standard of living who aren't able to produce. And we don't want other Canadians living in abject poverty. But the issue we don't think it should be a straight welfare hand down. We think it should be more of a quid pro quo. Something for something. So if you're going to get all the handouts like Quebec, there has to be something back, whether it's producing more or some indirect production, like supporting a pipeline that would help Alberta. There has to be a give and take, and that's something we would formulate into the calculation. It has to be. Because right now it doesn't make sense. It's straight. It's almost a form of communism. I don't know what those conservatives, they're anything but conservative, were thinking. Just pandering to Quebec. Just like the other mainstream parties. While they've harmed the country a lot, yet Alberta keeps voting for them. And we think it's insane. NCA has great policies and they ignore us. They need to shake their heads and start thinking. It's like they're programmed. They're programmed into hating liberals and Trudeau, but they have no understanding of the bigger picture, like NCA. So we shared it tonight. So think about it. But we have great policies, and those are the two issues we would tackle. But to put this in bigger context, is this grounds for separation? The seat allocation and equalization? Is that grounds for separation? Come on. That's grounds for correcting it, having a dialogue, and supporting parties who will correct it, like NCA. That's what it's grounds for. What's grounds for separation is the Boers in South Africa. They're distinct people there. They have an inherent right to that land that they're on, and they're facing borderline genocide right now. So we argue that they have legitimate grounds for self-determination. That's something we support, and we hope that they do get recognized for who they are as a people. But in terms of Alberta, like these, there's not a distinct people there. They don't have the same grievances. We just went through them. This is ridiculous. We're all Canadians. Do not lose sight of that. But we can, these are all fixable here. But people have to stop believing the rhetoric that's out there. That this is all Trudeau, this is all Liberals. They need to look at the big picture. Hopefully this helps tonight. Share your comments. And let's talk facts, not sentiments. Thank you.